Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another macro photography tutorial where today I'm going to explain to you how you can use a hula hoop to improve your macro photography skills. Now I know that's not very self-explanatory, so I will explain in just a sec. So then guys, why are we outside today? Why do I have a hula hoop with me? What kind of photography are we doing today? Well, we are doing macro photography and I'm not photographing the hula hoop. I'm experimenting with a new way of choosing and finding macro subjects. I think this is going to be a much more creative experiment than just going out into a wide open field like this and looking around, hoping to bump into some interesting insects or flowers. I think using a tool like this is going to enhance our creativity and perhaps let us find something that might have otherwise been overlooked. So think back to when you were a kid, maybe in biology or geography class, doing surveys. The way that we used to do those was to take a 1 square meter grid and place it down on the ground. And then inside that grid, you can count the different varieties of flower or maybe how many of a certain type of insect there are, and you can use that to extrapolate up and figure out how many insects there are in a much larger area, perhaps the whole field. I want to take that same principle of narrowing your vision down and focusing only on what you can handle so that you don't get distracted by maybe all of the interesting subjects in the woods or down by the river or the other side of the field. You can focus only what's inside your designated spot. Now, if you've not figured it out already, I'm going to be using a hula hoop instead of a 1 by 1 square meter grid because I don't have a grid and I'm sure you don't either. So go and grab yourself something similar. It's really up to you how much of a space you want to use as long as you're constraining yourself to a relatively small area. We're going to place this down somewhere random on the ground and then we're going to focus our camera only inside that space that we've given ourselves. You can ignore all of the interesting bugs flying around in your peripheral vision. You can ignore the babbling brook that might have some interesting fish in it. You can focus only on where your photographs are going to be taken. Now, it might not be a very interesting scenario. It might just be grass like mine is just here. We've got a few leaves, but that's only at first glance, looking with your naked eye. I'm sure as soon as you get your macro lens out, you're going to find some really interesting subjects. And even if you don't, you're going to push your photographic boundaries just a little bit more. Constraining yourself can actually increase your creative thinking. If you can't move outside of your little designated area and everything in there is fairly mundane and boring, maybe it's just grass and leaves like mine is, you're going to have to think outside of the box in other areas of your photograph. You're going to have to think about interesting angles. Perhaps you are going to change your settings or your lighting, things that you wouldn't normally do if you just had the ideal macro subjects sat there right in front of you. Now, this might not be for everyone. I understand that some people just like to get really interesting subjects and shoot them in a perfect manner, but this is a really nice way to spend an afternoon just pushing those horizons a little bit further than you normally would. So I've chosen my first little area just here and popped my hula hoop down in a relatively mundane spot. I've got some leaves on the ground, some various types of weeds, including a dandelion clock and some feathers that have been caught in the grass. Now, I'm not really sure what's actually going to come of this. We need to get close, we need to try a few angles and really experiment with trying to make these mundane things look a little bit more interesting in macro. So check it out, guys. I've been shooting for a little while. I've checked out my little feather over here. There's a dandelion clock over there, and these little interesting plants just here. They almost look like lily pads or something like that, especially when we add a little bit of extra light. So I've got these 2 flash lighting arms that I'm moving around the place as and when I need them. And the reason that I can move them around is because I'm using the Adaptalux Pod Mini. So I've got 2 Pod Minis, which is separating my lighting arms and I can move them around individually, take one away when I don't need it. Instead of having to unplug it, I'll just move it off to the side, and then of course I can bring them in from different angles as well and bend them in all sorts of unique ways. So having these two little minis here is proving to be a real advantage, being able to get underneath some of these little bits of foliage and get some artificial light in there. I'm also using some colored light, so this flash here currently has a red gel on the end of it, as well as a diffuser. I've also got a few other gels. Each flash arm is coming with its own set of colored gels, so you can get really creative with your flash lighting. Now, of course, I've still got the emitter on the top of my camera, which is making both of these flash. The only connection to the camera is that emitter, and then these can be placed wherever you want as long as those IR windows are visible from the emitter. So that really gives us a lot of creativity and a lot of flexibility to move our lighting around as we move around our space. Constraining myself to this tiny little area just here is doing exactly what I hoped it would. It's making me focus on those mundane objects and subjects within the space. There's actually loads of things around here that I'm starting to notice, including there's a campfire just here, which would be really interesting to shoot maybe the burnt coals, or there's molehills everywhere. There's a little log down here, which could be interesting, but I'm keeping to my word. I'm shooting only inside that circle, and that is making me exit my comfort zone a little bit, and that was the purpose of this exercise, because otherwise I would have just headed straight for the things that I know that I like to photograph, like the textures on those bits of wood, or perhaps I would have found an interesting flower, but then I would have come away with the exact same photographs that I've got before, whereas now I'm really pushing my boundaries and finding something a little bit more interesting in the mundane. Now, I did pick a particularly mundane spot deliberately. Maybe if you were out here, you could overlap your circle with part of the campfire and have a little bit more variety. But for the purposes of the demonstration, I've deliberately picked a spot away from all of that really interesting stuff and put myself into a little corner. That constraint is the important part. If you know that you're really good at shooting flowers, choose to shoot something else for just a little while. You might learn something that will help you with your flower photography. If you're really good at shooting bugs, maybe try shooting some grass for once, and it might help you frame the grass in your bug shots a little bit more pleasingly next time you go back to what you're familiar with. Now, of course, a shoot like this is completely gear agnostic as well. You can shoot using any kind of camera, any kind of lens, even your phone camera. You could come out and easily try something like this just with your phone and a hula hoop. I have been using a lot of artificial light to add some color and some added interest and mystique into these pretty mundane subjects. The artificial light that I'm using today is, as I mentioned, the AdaptLux flash lighting arms, but they're plugged into the new Control Pod Mini. This tiny little control pod is brand new. It makes everything much, much smaller, lighter, and much more portable for going out in the field like this. These Pod Minis are currently being kickstarted, so make sure you head over to the Kickstarter if you want to get some tiny little macro lights like this one. I'll link to that up in the top right hand corner of your screen now, and it will be down in the description. So how do we use a hula hoop to enhance our macro photography? Well, you simply throw it on the ground and pay attention to what's inside of it. This is just a big mind exercise to make you pay attention to things you might be passing up. Most macro photographers, I think, would walk straight past a mundane patch of grass in favor of more tempting subjects, potentially out there in the woods or the other side of the field. But this should narrow your perspective a little bit and make you look a little bit closer at things that you might not consider to be a very interesting subject, and that will therefore expand your photographic horizons and push your creativity a little bit more. Let me know what you think to this method down in the comments to the video, and make sure to hit the like button as well. Remember to head over to the Control Pod Mini Kickstarter page where you can get some small macro lighting for yourself, which is perfect for an exercise just like this. For now, that is all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.